Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the CEO of Tomoh Advisory, His Excellency Dr. Bassem Awadallah, and his panelists.
Good morning. It is my distinct pleasure to moderate this very important session, grouping three of the most illustrious ministers of finance in the GCC, His Excellency Mohammed Al-Jadaan, the Minister of Finance of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Excellency Dr. Naif Falah Al-Hajraf, the Minister of Finance of the State of Kuwait, His Excellency Shaikh Salman Al-Khalifa, the Minister of Finance and National Economy of the Kingdom of Bahrain. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage again. I will start directly. I think we have an audience which is primarily made up of investors, private sector representatives, leaders, who are keen to hear from their excellencies, the Ministers of Finance of three leading GCC states, what the outlook is. And I have to start by saying, Excellency, that it seems the fate of our region, the Middle East and North Africa region, and the promise of a more stronger economy in this region is in the hands of a few courageous countries that have realized that the only way to a stronger economy and a more dynamic economy is through rigorous structural, deep reforms that have to be addressed and have to be implemented. And Saudi Arabia has really shown the way, and it has led with Vision 2030. We have seen already the results through the non-oil sector growing in the second quarter of this year by 2.94%. We have seen the excellent result of Saudi Arabia in the easing of business report prepared by the World Bank, moving 30 places, the first in the world, from the rank of 92 to the rank of 62. This is quite impressive, and I think you need to be commended for all these excellent efforts. However, this is taking place against the backdrop of an economic slowdown. The IMF has reduced its outlook for the GCC to 0.7% this month, from 2.1% in April of 2019. So my question to you, Excellency, is how do you continue with this effort of reform? How do you achieve the growth that you really need to attain as per your objectives and as per the Vision 2030 parameters?
Thank you very much وحياكم الله جميعا المتحدثين باللغة العربية, and welcome to all the investors. I will speak in English, so you don't need to pick up your headsets. Welcome to everyone. I'm glad to be here and glad to see you for the third year, those who have been with us for the last 3 years. So I would want also to welcome my colleagues, their excellencies, Abu Badr and Sheikh Salman, for honoring me today to be here and to be in this panel. I think it is very important that when we talk about Saudi Arabia, we also talk about the GCC, and we talk about the extensive effort that we are working together to reform our economies, to work collectively, and to make sure that we coordinate and we are aligned. Going back to your question, I think Saudi Arabia, as we have said in the last couple of years, have embarked in a significant reform. That reform is exactly designed to respond to the challenges that we face in our own economy, but also to make sure that our economy is resilient against not only the challenges that we face locally, but also the challenges that we face internationally. And what you have just mentioned is exactly what we are preparing for. We are looking at significant structural reform that have taken place in the last 2 years that resulted in not only us advancing in international indices, whether it is the World Bank Ease of Doing Business, where Saudi Arabia came the first globally amongst 192 nations on advancing the most reformer country in the world in the last 12 months, but also in other indices like competitiveness, like the responsiveness of the government to changes, to technology, to the private sector. But also at the same time, we are focusing on specific industries where we are seeing really very good growth in terms of diversifying that economy. So we have seen significant growth in tourism, significant growth in technology, significant growth in sport and entertainment, significant growth in other industries. For the first time, for example, this year and since 2014, we have seen the construction sector turning from a negative, this time last year, 2.8 to a positive of 3%. So not only the indices, but also the actual numbers of the economic growth is responding to this. I think the IMF changes to the forecast on the GDP is basically influenced by two things. One is what is happening globally, which we also watch very carefully and make sure that we are prepared and our fiscal policies and our economic policies are able to respond to these international challenges. But also it is influenced by the oil production. I mean, our oil GDP this year is minus 3%. Why? Because we decided to reduce our production in oil to make sure that we and the OPEC and OPEC Plus, including our colleagues in the GCC, make sure that there is a stable market and energy market in the world and ensure that the long-term sustainability of that industry. What we are focusing on is the non-oil GDP, and the non-oil GDP, IMF have maintained the growth. As you said, we are growing at 2.9%, and that's what we are targeting. Our KPI for Vision 2030 is the non-oil GDP, how we are going to grow the non-oil GDP and not the oil GDP. I think we are also focusing on oil and looking at ways, and His Royal Highness Prince Abdulaziz spoke about what our vision is in relation to oil and how we are going to extract more value going forward, going to the downstream. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I will ask Sheikh Khalifa about the public-private partnership. Bahrain has done very well this year, actually. Your figures have not been revised. You have diversified. I think in terms of the program for balancing the budget, you are on target. You have put as an objective to basically abolish the budget deficit in the year 2022, and it seems that you are on target to do that. The growth of the non-oil sector, obviously, in Bahrain has been going on for quite some time. So how do you actually face the slowdown that is taking place regionally and globally? How do you find the role of the private sector? Do you see a role for the private sector in helping you address the issues of fiscal reform that you spend so much time on?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here in Riyadh. Thank you, Your Excellency, for the opportunity to be on this panel and to be at this great event again. With regards to the importance of the private sector in driving growth, that is critical. And ensuring that as we continue to build our economies, as we continue to create opportunity, we move from government-led growth to governments and policy providing the fertile ground for the private sector to provide the opportunities and the growth. When the government leads a project, it is putting $1 or a rial or a dinar into the economy. When the government changes a process or creates an a new legislative environment, then it is allowing the private sector to embark on many projects and many dollars and many dinars. And therefore, the multiplier effect is much larger when you do a reform of a sector than when you do a project led by the government in a sector. The work that has been done in this part of the world, maybe the biggest validation of that has been the Doing Business report numbers this year. 4 of the top 10 reformers in the world were from this region. Actually, the 4 countries represented on the stage, Saudi Arabia leading the way, the Kingdom of Bahrain, State of Kuwait, and the Kingdom of Jordan. That says a lot about the work that is being done within our economies to ensure that the private sector is given the tools, that the private sector deals with simplified processes to allow it to embark and create opportunity. If we were to look at the example we have seen in the Kingdom of Bahrain, over the last 15 years, the non-oil sector in Bahrain has grown at an annual rate of over 7%. 15 years ago, the non-oil sectors in the economy were 1/4 the size. They have grown 4 times the size in a period of 15 years. And that would not have been able to be done without active participation from the private sector and simplifying processes for the private sector. Today in Bahrain, oil represents less than 20% of GDP. Today in Bahrain, the private sector employs more than 2/3 of Bahrainis. This is very important when we look at the dynamics going forward. So when a disconnect happened on the fiscal side, with that economic growth, what was happening was that the non-oil sector was growing, but non-oil revenues weren't growing. Oil is always a distorting factor in our economy. You can't look at total revenues. You can't look at total GDP. You have to look at the policy-driven part of your economy, which is the non-oil portion. And that is what we need to continue to grow. And we have focused all of our policy on it. With regards to the fiscal balance plan, yes, in the last year, since the launch of the fiscal balance plan, with the financial support for that program put in place and agreed with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the State of Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates last October, we have done a lot of work. We have managed to cut the deficit in the first half of this year by 38%. We have managed to increase non-oil revenues by 47%. We've managed to cut government expenditure on administrative expenditure by 14%. But it is important to note that the fiscal balance plan in Bahrain is not a cost reduction plan. That's only part of the story. It is not a revenue generation plan. That is also only part of the story. What it is, overall, it is about aligning positive economic growth with a positive improvement in the fiscal position and making them positively correlated. And that is what it is about on an overall basis.
And it seems the private sector is actually responding positively, because the numbers show that the foreign direct investment, the private investments in Bahrain actually increased in the year 2019.
Absolutely.
Significantly.
And employment in the private sector has gone up, and wages for Bahrainis working in the private sector has gone up 4% from the beginning of this year alone.
So ministers of finance do have something to do with encouraging private investment.
Absolutely.
Against conventional wisdom.
Absolutely.
I would like actually just to comment on this. I think it is very, very important point. 2 factors actually we need to watch. One is at a time when globally FDI is actually declining.
Absolutely.
You know, if you look at the FDI numbers for 18, it has declined actually. We are seeing actually FDI picking up in the region. And just to give you an example, in Saudi, FDI have increased significantly in 18. FDI have increased in 19 year to date in Saudi Arabia. We are seeing the number of licenses in foreign investment in Saudi Arabia year to date more than any 1 year in the last 10 years or 9 years. So this is significant growth. The actual FDI number is growing by 10%. So there is actually more FDI is coming, but also local investment is coming. I mean, in Saudi Arabia, local private investment have grown the first half by about 3%. So there is more confidence. The other side is, as Sheikh Salman said, the FDI, the PPP is also a significant factor. In Saudi Arabia, for example, we are seeing less demand in budget expenditure on certain infrastructure projects because we are actually putting them to PPP. So water desalination, water treatment, healthcare, we have privatized some of the healthcare and we are going through even more. So not only that we are providing the private sector with the opportunity through structural reform, actually they are putting their money now into the economy and reducing the burden on the government expenditure budgets.
Your Excellency, Dr. Naif, Kuwait has also been a leading reformer, and we've seen the positive results also from the Ease of Doing Business report. And more importantly, you have Vision 2035, which is the new Kuwait. And your growth has actually done well, 1.8% in last year, and the second quarter this year, I think the first quarter was about 2.6%. Now, a lot of questions still surround the fiscal reforms. People ask about the value-added tax and when Kuwait is going to actually implement this tax, talking about just revenues on the revenue side and not only on the expenditure side. So would you care to just let us know what you're doing on the reform aspect?
Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much, and great to be here and great to be in the changing Riyadh. What we're seeing is something unprecedented, and it's phenomenal that makes all of us very proud, seeing at least this gathering over the last 3 days or so means a lot. Before answering your questions, I just would like briefly just to address the two previous questions my colleagues has answered. Diversifying away from oil. Oil will always be and has been and will continue to contribute significantly to the GDP in this region. And this region has not only responsibilities they cannot be seen as producers of the oil, but also as stabilizing the energy supplies and making sure that the world is having their needs. And this goes as a credit to the OPEC and the GCC countries to playing this role, especially as the oil price is moving ups and downs, and everyone is feeling that. So the role that the GCC is playing to stabilize the economy, and stabilizing the energy market is very significant. And this is something we are taking it very seriously, and we are admiring the agreement with OPEC and non-OPEC countries, which is still valid. And this is one of the reasons why the IMF actually has reduced the growth, because we are maintaining the stabilities of the energy supplies. That's one. Two, for the private sectors, and from that I will go back to the Kuwait Vision 2030. In this part of the world, everyone knows that what's happening over the last 70 years is something is historical in mankind history. I mean, this region 70 years ago was basically nothing. Now you are actually witnessing first-class cities across the GCC. That required at that time, and was totally understood, a larger government size. So only the government with the huge revenue coming from oil can transform the countries into what we are living in today in terms of infrastructure, schooling, hospitals, healthcare, and you name it. Now, it is not workable anymore to go as a government and be intervening in the business model in a very micro level. So the time has come for the government to zoom out from the operation and leave the room for the private sectors to lead the economy. And this is exactly what we are emphasizing on. And I'm talking about the Kuwait Vision 2030. I'm sure in Bahrain the same, and in Saudi Arabia the same. It's leaving the room for the private sector to lead. And this is probably what's been reflected in the audience, and for the last 2 days or so, it's all the private sectors are trying to see what are the opportunities that could be introduced so they can take the leading role. And we strongly believe in the willingness and the strength, capability, and creativity of the private sectors to lead, because historically speaking, the private sectors has been and will continue the main pillar in driving the economy forward.
Where are you in this process, Excellency?
In the process, the Kuwait Vision 2030 has actually indicated exactly where we need to be, indicates who will do what and how and when, and in all different levels of the vision, the private sectors are actually, as indicated, to play the significant roles. The private sectors, today's government is the largest employer. Now we are populations of 40% below 25 years of old. So there is a huge manpower going into the market very soon. We have about 100,000 students studying abroad. So those will come back and will go to the market force. So the government itself will never be able to accommodate all the needs, but we need the private sectors to lead in terms of creating jobs, which is another challenge facing this part of the world. We need to encourage the SMEs. Sure. We in Kuwait have put the National Fund for Small and Medium Enterprises with a bid capital of $7 billion. And this is targeting the young Kuwaitis to go and start up their own business, supporting them financially and technically until they can move on with their business. Also, we need to lower the burden on the government expenditures. And so the budget will be slim and will be focusing on the main activities the government should do and leave the door or the room for the private sectors to move on and to carry the historical tasks they've been carrying for quite a long time. And we, as I said, we strongly believe in that.
You haven't answered my question about the VAT, though.
Yes, I forgot that. Well, this questions have been asked so many times, and the answer is always the same. Kuwait being a constitutional monarch, we have the constitutions who forbidden the government to impose any kind of tax, you name it, any kind of tax without approval from the National Assembly, which is the elected parliament in Kuwait.
So you need legislation for that?
Exactly, yes. The GCC agreement has been signed in 2016. The effective date was January 1st, 2018. Saudi Arabia and UAE went on that date. Bahrain followed later on. And it has two aspects, the VAT and the excise VAT. We have submitted the GCC agreement for ratifications in the National Assembly, and it goes to the different procedures, constitutional procedures within the National Assembly. It is on the agenda. It is a very debatable issue, very heated as well, and especially we have an election year at the end of this year, 2020, and we have it as a priority from the government side, and we will go to the National Assembly and make sure that it will discuss when the agenda allows for that, and I hope that it will go through.
Thank you. I have, time is running out, so I have one very quick question for you, and then I want to go back to their excellencies again. I think a lot of people in the audience are thinking about the GCC. We keep mentioning the GCC. Now, there have been political differences in the last 2 years within the GCC, and people are asking, does the economic part of the GCC still hold? I mean, the regional integration, the common market, there was talk about a monetary union at one point among the GCC countries. Is this still valid? Can we still talk about the GCC as one economic unit or not?
Thank you. That's very good questions. We don't really think of the GCC we believe in the GCC. And over the last over the last 37 years or so, what has been achieved within the GCC umbrella is too good to let it go, and we are not letting it go. We do have our differences, no harm in that. And I think from professional point of view, we have these differences. We have to address the differences, and we have to work it out in a very professional way. It's not a secret, and I think this is the case everywhere. Talking about the economic agenda, we strongly believe, and I'm sure my colleagues agree on that the economic agenda should not be affected by any political views or differences we have. We have today, we will have it tomorrow, we had it in the past, and this is very normal. But the economic agenda is the agenda that will affect every GCC citizen, from Oman to Kuwait, from Bahrain to Qatar, from Saudi Arabia to UAE. And this is exactly the focus of the GCC Economic Committee, which 3 of them is represented here. And we, despite all the differences, we have maintained our meetings. We have maintained the committees that reporting to the ministerial committees, and it's never been affected. And this is something we are capitalizing on, because at the end of the day, the GCC citizens would like to enjoy being a GCC citizens with all the rights, with all the eligibility to support the economy of these 6 countries. We are talking about the private sector roles. The private sector is Mohammed and Ali and Khalid al-Mawjudin. Those are who are in the street. So without focusing on the economic agenda, we will not be able to give the role for the private sectors we are talking about. Without complementing each visions, the Saudi visions, the Bahraini visions, the Kuwaiti visions, the UAE visions, it's a one big vision. And without complementing these visions and supporting each other's, we still need more to leave the room for the private sectors. So back to your questions, my simple answer is the GCC is there and will continue to be there, and we are working on the economic agenda collectively, and we are coordinating in this manner ever since, and will never stop.
I think reality, if I may, Badr, reality is actually decisions are being made every year to enhance the economic integration. The last few are, for example, allowing citizens, the professionals in each of the GCC countries to practice in other countries through passporting. So basically, you don't need to go through the process of getting licensed in Saudi Arabia if you are a licensed lawyer in Kuwait or in Bahrain. So a Bahraini lawyer or a Kuwaiti lawyer can actually come and get his licensed practice in Saudi Arabia without any issues, as if he is a Saudi. And that applies to all the professional. And so it is actually that enhancement is ongoing. Decisions are being made. Custom unity is continuing. So the economic part is actually improving with every meeting that we meet, and we meet at least twice a year, and decisions are being made in every meeting to improve that economic integration.
I will come back to you with the last question, sir. I have a question for His Excellency Sheikh Salman. How happy are you as a Minister of Finance when you see the milestones that you are achieving? You have a goal to reach in 2020, but you also 2022, but you also see your debt rising to 100% of GDP. Does that make you sleepless at night? How happy or unhappy are you about the milestones that you are reaching now?
Thank you. The progress so far has been positive. Of course, during a period of a deficit reduction plan, as we work towards eliminating the deficit, we would expect that debt to GDP will be rising because we have to be funding those deficits. and that is a part of the plan. As long as we have, as we are sticking to plan, as long as we have a plan for how to execute that, then we are on the right track, and the milestones have been working well. And we are also very focused on ensuring that we are simplifying procedures and that we are opening up for more business. And we've seen the positive results of that. We've seen the ability to maintain growth. And what is very important during this period of fiscal consolidation, of deficit reduction, is that we are maintaining spend on social services and that we are maintaining spend where it results in economic growth. This is very important to do, because if we manage to eliminate the deficit but affect economic growth and job creation, then we will not have done our job.
Absolutely.
It is extremely critical to keep that going. And when we talk about the process of reform that has been taking place with regards to government services, government approvals, etc., it's important to note that it's not enough to create a portal. It's not enough to create a one-stop shop in front of a 40-year-old process or in front of a 30-year-old process. It is critical to take every step of the approval process and re-engineer it. And that's how we've been doing it.
Sir, you are our host. I will have the last question for you. I was a Minister of Finance in my country for a very brief period. I was sleepless for a few months, and I lost 7 kilos because I was watching the price of oil go up from $22 all the way to $48 within the span of 3 weeks. I could not sleep. I think of you every day because I think you go to sleep thinking about the price of oil in the other direction until you get out of this dependence on oil. How critical is this for you now? When price of oil goes down, do you watch 60, 59, 61? Are you really bothered, or you don't really take too much attention for this?
Two things. First of all, thanks God, I actually sleep very well every night. And seriously, I actually don't watch the oil price every day. I watch it regularly, but not every day. I think the drive that we go by is really mid to long term. The idea of Vision 2030 is actually to get out of this very tense volatility concern. We wanted to make sure that we act in a counter-cyclical and not pro-cyclical approach, and our fiscal policy takes that approach. So yes, it is important, and as you have less sleep when the price goes up, I actually enjoy more sleep when the price goes up, but we don't want the price to go too much up at the same time. So that balance is very important. But from our perspective, I think the fiscal policy is about making sure that it is a staple, it is going to fund our expenditure, and we have the fiscal levers. I mean, Saudi Arabia has a very strong, as the other GCC have very strong fiscal levers to actually weather shocks in the economy as we have seen in the past.
Well, at the end of this panel, I want to wish you all the best. You have done superbly well in your reform effort. We just need to support you, we need to encourage you, and we hope that you will also be a beacon for the rest of the region, because the region needs desperately economic growth, and we hope you will lead the way.
Absolutely.
Thank you very, very much, Excellencies. Thank you very much for listening this morning.
Thank you.